Welcome to a special episode of Let's Have a Renaissance, the Datekeeper podcast. My name is Matt Marello, and I am a visual artist who currently lives in New York City. I was born in Reading, Pennsylvania, and was the first in my family to attend college, which brought me to the Philadelphia College of Art in 1978. I studied painting and received a BFA in 1982. While I was on my first summer break in 1979, a high school friend and I were standing and talking in the family room of my childhood home when, quite suddenly and without warning, he and the room and everything else around me completely vanished. I found myself hovering in a vast black void of infinite nothingness. There was absolutely nothing in this blank space, save for a geometric object hovering in the nothingness in front of me. Two parallel circles composed entirely of aquamarine light, each circle a perfect mirror of the other. From my point of view, one circle was in front of the other, both skewed at an angle that made the three-dimensional aspect of the structure quite apparent. It looked like the outlines of a glowing wheel. Even though the thing was structurally simple in its makeup, it felt somehow eternal, unchanging, and alive. Strangely, it also seemed to be aware of my presence. I even had the sense that it had brought me to itself, to the vast nothingness, for the purpose of me seeing it. Then, just as quickly as the experience began, it was over. I was back in the room where I had been standing an instant ago. My high school friend was still right in front of me, in the middle of the exact word he'd been speaking before I'd left the room. I was overwhelmed, excited, and confused. My whole body surged with energy. I blurted out to my friend, "Did you see that?" He stopped whatever it was he was saying and stared at me with a frightened look on his face. I exclaimed again, "Did you see that?" I ran to grab a piece of paper, something I could draw on. I needed to record what had happened, to capture what I'd seen as best I could. This is the sketch I made that day. Although the object itself was static from my perspective, I recently created a three-dimensional rendering of the object to give a better understanding of the structure. For weeks after the experience, I thought about what had happened, unable to get the image out of my head. I didn't tell anyone, however, because I didn't know what to say. The whole experience made no logical sense, and because my friend and I never talked about it again, there wasn't much I felt I could say or do. A few years after graduating college, I moved to New York City to take a stab at establishing an art career. One of my first undertakings was a public art project, which focused exclusively on the aquamarine circles. My primary motivation was to see if there was anyone else out there in the world who had had a similar experience. New York City, being one of the major crossroads of the world, seemed like a perfect place in which to launch a search. First they made thousands of handbills, single sheets of paper with the circles emblazoned on them, at a local print shop in the village, and over the next several weeks handed them out to passers-by. Several of my friends and I passed out the flyers in tourist areas where there would be a higher concentration of world travelers. Each day, I held out hope that someone would take one of the flyers and exclaim, "Hey, I saw that thing too." But unfortunately, it never happened. Next, I had some large posters printed up and started plastering them onto construction sheds and abandoned buildings around the city at night. I wasn't quite sure how anyone would get in touch with me since I wasn't about to put my phone number on the posters. It's illegal to post bills in the city. I guess I thought that if someone did have the same experience as me and saw these posters, they would do everything in their power to contact me. One night in Soho, I was pasting one of the posters on a boarded-up building when suddenly a bright light cast my shadow onto the wall in front of me. I turned around to see an NYPD police cruiser directly behind me, even though my trusty lookout was down the street supposedly doing her job. I was given a citation for a court appearance, which led to a hefty fine, and I decided after that my postering days were over. I then embarked on something a bit more legal. By the late 1980s, early 90s, New York City was going through a rough patch, and there were hundreds of unused billboards scattered throughout the downtown area. I approached one of the major billboard companies and asked them if they would be open to the idea of letting an artist put an image on one of their unused billboards. To my great surprise, they said yes. The first billboard I did was installed on the corner of Bowery and 6th Street in the East Village, which seemed like a perfect location. It, like the previous flyers and posters, featured only the image of the two circles set against the black background. No text, no contact information, just the symbol. I was again hopeful someone who'd had a similar experience as myself would see it and get in touch with me. The Bowery, after all, was a major thoroughfare, and the corner on which the billboard was situated was right next to the Cooper Union and the NYU campus. The billboard stayed up for several months and was probably seen by hundreds of thousands of people. A few months later, a second billboard was installed in the West Village, on the corner of 7th Avenue and Bedford Street. This one was visible for several months as well. I then found out about an actual art billboard competition in Atlanta, Georgia. I entered my design and it was unexpectedly chosen. They gave me a huge billboard on one of the main highways into the city, and I'm sure it was seen by hundreds of thousands of people as well. But again, no contact was ever made. One of the craziest projects I did was to put a video of the two aquamarine circles on a New York City public access station. For those who don't know about public access, when cable television was first introduced, local franchises were compelled by the city government to provide a public access channel for any New Yorker who wanted to produce their own show. These 24-hour public access stations were available free of charge on a first-come, first-served basis, and the maximum length of any show was 30 minutes. My show consisted of a still image of the two parallel blue circles set against the black field with no sound and no text, only the circles running for a full half hour. The video aired a total of 13 times between May and October of 1991. Eventually, the cable channel got sick of me submitting the same tape over and over again, and they told me that I had to stop. The final project I did came about through an independent art dealer who pitched the idea of using my work for a window display at the Saks Fifth Avenue flagship store in Midtown Manhattan. To my utter shock, the store went for it. At the time, I was working on a series of paintings with aquamarine circles made of neon that were paired with my own contemporary renderings of the Garden of Eden myth. One painting, for example, featured a large apple. Another had portraits of Adam and Eve, and another a rendering of the garden itself. For the Saks installation, the painting served as a backdrop for the window displays, against which the mannequins were placed in the foreground. For an entire month, these neon paintings lit up Fifth Avenue between 49th and 50th Street. I was once again hopeful that this type of exposure would lead to some kind of dialogue. Unfortunately, no one came forward with a similar story. And so, after several years of putting the image out into the public, I started to grow discouraged. I concluded that I would probably never find someone else who had had the same experience, and I all but abandoned the idea of trying to find definitive answers. For the next 15 years, I focused on a completely different project. I created a series of video works in which I inserted myself, painstakingly frame by frame, as a character in existing films and TV shows. I produced many gallery and museums exhibitions around the world, and the work garnered much critical attention. I was also awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship and 2 New York Foundation for the Art grants for the work. Then, everything changed after 9/11. September 11th had a huge impact on me and the city and the world at large. I stopped working in my studio altogether, as did many other artists. Art making seemed kind of pointless in the aftermath of so much death and destruction. I went through a period of personal reassessment and ultimately decided that I needed to return to the issue that mattered to me most. I rededicated myself to the research. Years earlier, I had stumbled upon the work of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung and his idea of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. An archetype is a universal pattern upon which other things are copied or based, akin to Plato's forms and ideas. Jung believed that there are basic archetypes common to all humankind, and that they originate in the inherited structure of the brain, which forms a link between the individual and humanity as a whole, and by extension, the entire cosmos. These patterns also spontaneously appear in our images, myths, rituals, and stories as a species. Archetypes, according to Jung, often bubble up to the surface in dreams and hallucinations, and provide the basis of the universal motifs found in myths and religions around the world. Psychologist and philosopher Eric Newman wrote,
"When an archetype breaks through, that is in certain extraordinary circumstances, there comes an illumination, a momentary uprising of unconsciousness, like the tip of an island breaking through the surface, a flash of revelation which interrupts the humdrum flow of conscious existence. These isolated phenomena have always been regarded by primitives and by us as characterizing the great individual who, as medicine man, seer, and prophet, and their insights, whether they take the form of visions, dreams, or revelations, lay the foundation of culture. These individuals are unexpectedly seized by the unconscious content, but at the same time their conscious mind has a firm grip on the content as they bring forth these new values and images to the world. The assimilation of these archetypes into society can take many forms, a work of art, or a new way of thinking or seeing the world. But what is most important is that the individual comes to terms with the content and brings it forth into the world."
Armed with this understanding, I decided to produce a series of paintings and drawings that focused on my anomalous experience. I felt the best place to begin was with automatic drawings. In other words, just let my mind roam free and allow things to bubble up from my subconscious, as the surrealists of the 1920s and 30s had done. While staring at a blank piece of paper, I would draw whatever image or images came to my mind, one after the other, in a kind of free association. The first thing I drew was the image of a face, perhaps my own, with the 2 rings embedded in its forehead. From this face and head radiated spikes and fire and smoke outward onto the rest of the page. I then added a couple of hands pointing into the sky, several rockets, a comet, the planet Earth spewing sperm into space, a volcano, a floating head sprouting wings, 2 winged creatures with reptilian feet, and a few dinosaurs for good measure. All at once, I seemed to have landed on a type of aesthetic for myself, one that combined the symbol with figural elements, all tied together by a rapturous emotional outpouring onto the page. This first image spurred me to do several more automatic drawings. Over time, I found that many of the iconographic characters and symbols began to repeatedly pop up in each subsequent drawing. There were dismembered hands pointing to floating heads with wings and farting men propelled to the sky, and hermaphroditic angels with reptilian feet, to name a few. Once I'd amassed enough of these iconographic characters, I started to refine them and work out how they would be painted on canvas. I also noticed how much these automatic drawings reminded me of the work of Jan van Eyck, specifically his painting Crucifixion and Last Judgment in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The fantastic imagery of the Last Judgment panel I have long admired, and it seemed to have somehow seeped into my creative subconscious. I decided I would use this early Renaissance painting style as a template for my new paintings. I found the charming naivete and masterful use of oil paint, all arranged in a symmetrical motif that reflected the balance of the 2 parallel circles, a perfect fit for what I was trying to express. The end result was a series of works called The Black Paintings, first exhibited in 2012 at the Pierogi Gallery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. In the next series of work, I recreated several Renaissance depictions of the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea, where St. John the Divine is said to have experienced his revelation. I removed St. John from the original scene, allowing the viewer to become a witness to my hyper-stylized personal vision instead. In my contemporary paintings, instead of St. John's vision, I placed the aquamarine circles hovering over the landscape, accompanied by a host of my surreal characters. Being self-aware of the religious aspects of the work, I eventually branched out from the paintings to produce what I called pseudo-historic artifacts. These included a set of medieval-style reliquary boxes, a large-scale stained glass window, and several other objects that referenced religious artifacts. I described this body of work as historical artifacts from a non-existent religion. My intent was to create a fictitious museum exhibition where all the paintings and artifacts were gathered together in one place and presented as cultural byproducts of a historic time and place that never actually existed. Although I mostly work alone in my studio day after day, I couldn't quite surrender my desire to interact directly with people. Whenever I travel, I always take with me a stack of postcards and do spontaneous handout performances. For instance, I visited Istanbul, Turkey in 2014 and did a performance in front of the Blue Mosque in the Hagia Sophia. It can sometimes be difficult to engage with people because they usually think you are handing them some kind of solicitation. But when I hold the card directly in front of a person and they get a good visual, most people reach out and take the postcard, sometimes even asking a few questions. Here's a picture of me handing a postcard to a soldier guarding the Hagia Sophia. I never know what happens to all the postcards after I give them out, but I rarely see them discarded on the ground or in trash cans after the performance. I suspect that people find them interesting enough to hold on to them or maybe even bring them home. The most interesting performance I did while traveling was at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem in 2017. When I first arrived, the plaza in front of the wall was teeming with thousands and thousands of worshippers bobbing their heads and reciting prayers. I was very nervous as I approached the wall and began to press my cards into the cavities between the stones. I was certain that one of the worshippers would object to what I was doing, or that a security guard would ask me to leave, but to my surprise, not a single person said a word. I pushed the cards into the entire length of the wall, took a few photographs, and continued on my way. When I returned the next day, almost all of the cards were still stuck in the wall. And who knows, maybe a few are still stuck in the wall to this day. For decades I had been taking notes about my experience in a massive black book with gilded edges and blank pages that I had found on a street in the East Village after moving to New York City in the late 1980s. For a long while it sat in my studio untouched. But then, one day, I grabbed a pencil and began to write. It was the beginning of what turned out to be a lifelong project, one that continues unabated to this day. Over time I filled the notebook with thoughts and information and research, whatever came to mind having to do with the anomaly. The first few pages came from scattered notes lying around my room. I soon ran out of blank pages in the original book and hired a bookbinder to create a second book in exactly the same style. The notebooks were, in hindsight, destined to become my own personal Bible, a record of my search for the reason and meaning of the anomalous experience. I've researched hundreds of books and articles on science, math, religion, art, and philosophy, all in the hopes of uncovering any meaning to the experience and hopefully teasing out some sort of explanation. My first reveal of the notebook pages took place during two gallery installations, one at Pierogi Gallery in Brooklyn and the other at Il Ponte Contemporanea in Rome. It was during the COVID-19 lockdown that I began to organize the thousands of pages of notes I had collected over the years. When I finally stepped back and looked at the whole crazy concoction, I suddenly saw an interconnectedness I had never imagined before. All the research began to reveal the secrets of the visual anomaly, and all the pieces of the puzzle seemed to magically click into place. Soon after this, I began to write a book which I continue to work on to this day. The Anomaly, which is the working title, has become my magnum opus and the culmination of years and years of research. I hope to complete the book soon, although the research continues to expand even as I write the manuscript. I am aware that one day I will need to say the work is complete, or at least decide that what needs to be said has been said. My plan is to create a signed and numbered limited edition hardcover monograph, along with a commercially available paperback edition. Until then, I continue to work and look forward to the day when I complete the project and send it out into the world.